If you have trouble placing eyes on the face in perspective or just drawing the second eye after you draw the first one, I might have a solution for you. So let's say you draw a face, you know it's going to face, say, this direction, right? Then you have the chin somewhere. But how do I put the eyes in this situation? So let's focus on like the most basic common proportions. So I would say this line is pretty close to middle, so we'll take that. The first thing I do for eyes, if I'm not sure about the perspective, instead of just drawing, pick an eye and drawing it, is I align the irises. So if I say I want him to, or I want her to look this way, I know here's the center line. I know approximately how far it is. I don't mark these out when I paint because, you can kind of just ballpark it. So like the length of the eyes, right? This is one eye length, and then second eye length, and third eye length. So you separate the two eyes with one eye length. Is a good place to start. So I know the eye's about here. I want the gaze to be top right. So I will move the iris, the line of the iris, to the right. So this is approximately center, and moving it to the right a little bit. That establishes the left and right. This is very important. So this alignment takes care of a lot of your problems. So this is aligned with the vertical axis of the face. And once you have that, then it's very easy to fill the rest. We want to just take care of the alignment first instead of designing. So if the character's gaze is looking up, then chances are they're not going to touch the bottom of the if it's fully open, the iris won't touch the bottom. All right, something like that. And now, because this is a straight line, but sometimes we want to try, you can leave your iris like this, but sometimes I want to have a circular iris. So it's easier to mark the location with just like a straight line for eyes, because you see this right here, because of the perspective. If I have a line like this, I know the circle is going to be like slightly slanted this way. We can apply the same logic for eyebrows. There's no reason to draw one eyebrow and then figure out the other. We just draw one line across the face because the eyebrows should be aligned in a neutral position. Now, once we draw the eyebrows in, we can move it down. So this is down, and then this is slightly up. Now we can control the position of the individual eyebrows with relation to their normal position. The same thing if the eyes in a down position, or the character is facing down. So let's say you draw a head and then you want the character to face down, like really down. Here's the head. Halfway point is around there. You can also just draw the full iris, like in alignment with the center axis. But the thing is, when the character is looking down, the upper eyelid, especially if the eyes half closed, is going to block out most of the iris itself. First, we determine where the vertical line is supposed to fall. So that's approximately it. So the other eye must be somewhere here, right? So the important part that I look for is the vertical alignment with the vertical of the face. And then horizontal alignment should make sense with respect to perspectives. So when you map out vertical lines for the iris like this, it's very easy for me to determine this curvature. This should be shorter than this, because so we have face number 2 and then face 1 and 2. In the case I draw a single eye, that's really good. If we look at the alignment, you can get a lot of it correct. So that's the alignment. So the second eye must be pretty close to this. Maybe not exactly here. Maybe it's closer because of how we're almost at the side view. Just draw the rest of the face. So let's only look at the eye positioning on the face. The simplest method to demonstrate the idea that you already know where to place the eye and how, approximately how to place the eye, is you draw a smiley face. So let's say you have a smiley face. So we can tell this is an okay one because everything's kind of aligned. But what if I did this? You can tell that it's off because, you know, this distance is not, it's closer, and then, you know, maybe the alignment's weird. So this one goes here. So let's do centered, right? This is very easy to do, this exercise. So let's say I draw one eye, and it's like really nice eye. Now, how do I draw it on the other side? You just have to make sure that everything lines up. That's easier said than done, especially when you are drawing a fully rendered face. Now, the logic is the same even if it's a fully rendered face. So let's say I draw an eye like this, and I draw an eyebrow, and I say this is a really nice eye, and then I want to draw a second eye. I think most people would be able to draw a second eye, like alignment. This is very clear, right? Eyebrow, and then we can draw the rest of the face. This is simple. You can apply that same logic to an anime eye or any other style, really. Now, that's not too hard. Now, what if I already have one rendered eye? We can just simplify that. So let's say I have this really nicely rendered eye. Let's move the perspective a little bit. Maybe you've seen how to draw eyes on Pinterest, and you found this really good, like a nice looking eye that you like, and then you draw it, and now you're stuck. We can simplify this to that, and this can go a few ways. Like, the perspective is not very strict on eyes like this because we're not drawing too detailed of an anatomy, and the eye shape can be a little bit different, so you can interpret the perspectives a little bit differently. But now that we have the structure, the perspective in, and the proportions in, we can, you don't really need the guideline once you get used to see it in your head. Just draw the rest of the face. Yeah, so I think that demonstrates this method really well. So one thing that people think about when they do guidelines is sometimes they overuse guidelines, or sometimes they use guidelines very haphazardly. Guidelines are like notes, and notes only really help if you know what the details are. So let's say if I were to draw, you know, like some people would do guidelines like here's the eye, and then maybe they have, you know, like here's 0 0.25, 0 0.5, and then maybe let's say 0 0.15 is the hairline or something. You know, a bunch of weird proportions or whatever proportions that you decide to study from. And then here's the nose, and then maybe here's, I don't know, 0 0.125 or something. It's like between the nose and the bottom of the chin. You know, don't like, these numbers are just random numbers that I picked because I think that's close to what proportions I am I'm used to drawing and seeing on references, but they have no significant meaning. So now they go, they start measuring eye length. You leave a little bit on the sides here, and then there's your eye. And sometimes they do the guideline. But the thing is with guidelines, one, it's easy to get super stiff drawings from it, and then the second one is sometimes when you do guidelines like this, like that, after you study all this stuff, you try to apply it, and maybe you do like the Loomis head method, and then you try to apply your proportions. And you find that you run into issues where you're trying to align the eyes, so you do this, right? But if you're not doing the guidelines correctly, or if you don't know how to do the guidelines correctly because you lack skill of doing accurate perspectives, to the point where you're not sure what's even wrong, or maybe you don't even see that something's inaccurate based on your own standards and preferences, then even if you say I can measure this 0.5 from here to here, I can draw the eyes in, it might not work. So some people might mistaken this line, right? And then they start the nose here. Then we go center for the mouth, and then we'll do like a random line here. And you have all these guidelines, and there's way more guidelines you can put, and then you go ahead and you try to align it. You just copy the head. Maybe you know that the back of the head protrudes more, and then I'm copying somewhat faithfully. I don't know if you guys can tell, but it looks a little bit awkward. And then let's say you try to render it. Let's try to render this a little bit. It looks okay, right? It doesn't look that bad. It has a bit of style into it, but you can tell that it's a little bit janky, and I can move this stuff I can move the features into the right places, but you're thinking here, I follow all the guidelines, I follow the Loomis method. Why doesn't it work? It still looks awkward, even though here we can follow these guidelines pretty faithfully. This is like top third or fourth of the eyes, and then I'm aligned pretty well on the eyebrows. I'm aligned pretty well on the nose. This is about halfway, and then I did the whole. But the problem is this Loomis method is not that there's a problem with the Loomis method. It's the carelessness in the application. So even if I were to do it very carefully, we can fix. Some people might say, this is the circle is not perfect. It's gotta do a very good circle. And then some people might say, the cross section for this is not perfect. Okay, now it's pretty accurate. Forgot some of the details for the Loomis method, but this is approximately how it works. It's hard for me to take out how I see things, even though I'm trying to follow the Loomis method. I'm incorporating other types of observations that I use on top of it. So even though I'm doing this, the results might vary if you have less experience or more experience. So on the second run, I applied the Loomis method a bit more accurately this time, without any major mistakes in perspectives. I would say it's pretty accurate. And the result looks a lot better than the first one, obviously, but it's still a little stiff. But the bigger problem is when most people first start out and they look to learn how to draw the like features of the face, they might look to Loomis method or other methods to use it as a guideline to learn how to draw the face. But these methods require pretty high precision for perspective in order to lay out all the features correctly to the point where it kind of defeats the purpose of having a beginner learn a method to draw something. So the proposed method is if you just draw a smiley face, because we're so good at looking at faces and seeing what's wrong. If we just draw a smiley face, I'll draw the same angle as this. I'm not going to worry about the details, but just, the eye placement. So if we just get to this point, I think it's a good starting point, and you can, reference other art or photos to see how you want to fill in the rest of the head. Instead of using perspectives and cross sections for a sphere, I'm just using straight lines here. And then for the rest, I can just intuitively fill it in. Most people practice faces and they can fill in some details, like very simple, just like an anime face with a really sharp chin. So you want to make sure, center is kind of aligned. There's no reason to get too technical at this stage, especially if you're just new. So because the face is pretty simple, if anything looks awkward, I can just move it. So right now, maybe the nose and the mouth looks kind of awkward in position. I'm not putting any numbers. It's the same thing as moving features on just a basic smiley face. I just want the proportion itself to look good, not trying to measure anything out. I'm not obviously I'm putting it somewhere in the halfway point, and most people would have that intuition already. And I think this is much simpler than trying to build out all these guidelines. So this is just from a smiley face, and I think this looks a bit less stiff and also easier to stylize. If you try to stylize a Loomis head, you have to do things like make the proportion of the chin or the jaw shorter. I think this is also in the book. So it's like a rounder face. They do go over, Loomis does go over how to change the proportion of the head, just how to wiggle the proportions a little bit. That's no different than, just wiggling the proportions on like a simpler face without all the guidelines. I'm not saying guidelines are bad. It's just if you try to, let's say, if you try to do guidelines and like you're not sure about placing stuff and you already have things that are super rendered, you're thinking, oh, how should the alignment of the ears be? How high should it be compared to the eyes? And then if we look at something more complicated like Asaro head, now you're dealing with really complicated lines that you have to put into perspective. If you're doing all this and you can do it accurately, then you probably don't need these guidelines to begin with, just to place the eye correctly. They still help for a certain stylization or shading or simplification, but that's a much smaller population of artists who would benefit from studying the Asaro head, especially for people who are just starting out. And like if you have trouble drawing the second eye, this is probably not the method to solve that. At least it's like a long way around. One good application of the Loomis head method or any other construction type method is when you have angles that are very awkward, that you can't intuitively tell how it should look because we don't see people from those kind of angles very often. So let's say face tilted like very up. So this is where I think construction methods would help with feature placements, and that's even if you're using references. And stuff like this would be a bit outside the scope of what we're talking about here. As far as placing features goes, it's important to think about which guidelines you need and how accurate do you need you need those guidelines to be in order to place the features, because if you don't understand what the guideline is trying to depict and you don't know how to get it accurate enough, then they're not going to be very helpful. For example, when we draw a face like this and you're drawing a horizontal or a cross section for the center, whether you want to align the eyes or the eyebrows doesn't matter. But let's say I draw something like this, and this is good enough for me personally, because I can I know how it's supposed to curve around the sphere, even though my initial line's not accurate. I can work off very, very rough guidelines because I know where it is wrong, and this is just to mark some position. But if you can't really tell, like you're making guidelines and you can't really tell the difference between this and this, then the notes that you make are not going to be that effective. Sometimes it will be misleading. And this is where a lot of people run into problems. Placing the second eye is just one of the most obvious ones because we're so good at discerning the mistakes on a face. Whereas other types of subjects, you wouldn't really notice the mistake as much because we're not used to seeing it. Features like ears, legs, or inanimate objects, you can be a bit off and you won't really notice it. That's why a lot of people have problem placing the second eyes because they perceive the problem, but they can't technically solve it. So I think smiley face method is pretty good because it relies on intuition, which you already have, instead of working from guidelines, which requires you to have accurate perspectives. So you can work it from the intuitive side and then add the technical aspects little by little as you need instead of jumping into the technical side and then working it to the point where intuitively it looks right. It just seems backwards to me. The approach seems backward if you're not already technically skilled with perspectives and observations.